In October 1999, at the University of Tokyo Hospital, a patient was admitted who had just been exposed to nuclear radiation, a dose far exceeding the annual limit for a normal person. The patient was conscious with no burn marks on his body. Aside from his right hand being slightly red, he appeared no different from a normal person. The nurse in charge thought he would be discharged very soon. However, just 1 day later, his skin turned red, as if sunburned, and his right hand, the area most exposed to the radiation, began to swell and ache. What the patient didn't know yet was that, in the instant he was hit with that massive dose of radiation, the chromosomes in his body that store and transmit genetic information had been obliterated. This meant his body could no longer produce any new cells. A week later, while changing medical tape, the nurses discovered that without exception, every patch of skin the tape touched would be ripped clean off with it. Under normal circumstances, skin constantly renews itself. The basal layer of the skin continuously supplies the upper layers with new skin cells. But while his old skin was constantly flaking off, new skin could not regenerate. His entire body began to disintegrate, leaving not a single intact spot anywhere. To make matters worse, the white blood cells in his body, responsible for fending off pathogens, had long since been all but wiped out. The slightest infection was now enough to be fatal. At the same time, his lungs began to fill with fluid and his breathing became labored. After the doctors decided to put him on a ventilator, he could no longer speak with his family. 27 days later, an endoscopy revealed that his intestinal lining was sloughing off in sheets, and the volume of his diarrhea increased by the day. With his daily output exceeding 3 liters, after 3 weeks of diarrhea, his intestines began to bleed profusely. Sometimes he needed more than 10 blood transfusions in a single morning. Every day he lost body fluids through his skin and intestines, nearly 10 liters. More than once he begged for the doctors to stop treatment and end his life. But he could only watch helplessly as his body gradually disintegrated, slowly melting away, enduring a torment unimaginable to the average person. After 83 days of treatment and agony, his life finally came to an end just before the new millennium. This patient's name was Hisashi Ouchi. What he suffered from was the horrific acute radiation sickness. Some of you might be wondering, what if it were a less acute radiation sickness caused by nuclear radiation? Would the situation be any better? The answer is yes, it would be slightly better. According to Quark, AI health search, if you're lucky, it would only lead to nervous system damage, hematopoietic system damage, and immune system damage, or even cancer and so on. Please don't think for a second that this AI is joking with you. Quark AI Health Search is an incredibly reliable health education tool. Quark has built its own professional medical knowledge base, and its AI search is updated in real time. It provides answers based on authoritative sources, using evidence-based medical causal reasoning. The advice it gives is based on the opinions of top-tier doctors and summarized from professional literature. It absolutely does not fabricate information. Its main focus is being rigorous and reliable. No matter how you search, one thing is clear: once you've been exposed to excessive radiation, the damage to your body is undeniable. It's just a matter of degree. So that brings us to the question, how exactly does nuclear radiation harm the human body? Nuclear radiation, as the name implies, is the nucleus of an atom radiating outwards. The things being emitted mainly include alpha rays, beta rays, and gamma rays. The power of these different rays varies greatly. Alpha rays are high-speed helium nuclei, which are equivalent to arrows. It has the weakest penetrating power. A single sheet of paper is enough to block it. Of course, if it's inhaled and causes internal exposure, that's a whole different story. Beta rays, on the other hand, are streams of electrons. Think of them as a handgun. They can penetrate the skin, causing significant burns upon exposure. You need an aluminum plate or protective gear to defend against them. And then there are gamma rays, high-energy electromagnetic waves. They're like a sniper rifle, able to penetrate the human body and even buildings. You need lead, plates, or thick concrete walls to block them. All three of these are types of ionizing radiation. Through a process of ionization, they can destroy the DNA and other large biological molecules within our cells, causing cells to malfunction and die, or to become cancerous, leading to all kinds of damage to the body. So when does an atomic nucleus emit this radiation? The answer: when it's unstable. Some elements are naturally unstable, like the radium discovered by the Curies, radon found in building materials, and polonium-210 in cigarettes. Of course, we can also use artificial means to make certain elements even more unstable. For instance, by bombarding the heavy nucleus of uranium-235 with a neutron. This causes the uranium-235 to split into several lighter nuclei, while releasing more neutrons and a massive amount of energy. This process is called nuclear fission, and if there happens to be other uranium-235 nuclei nearby, the released neutrons will continue the bombardment, triggering new fission reactions. This is the legendary chain reaction. With an enrichment of 3 to 5% uranium-235s, you can create nuclear fuel. At an enrichment level over 85%, you can make a nuclear weapon. The neutron radiation produced during this reaction has absolutely terrifying, penetrating, and destructive power. Hisashi Ouchi's accident happened because, during the process of preparing nuclear fuel, he and his colleagues in the precipitation tank violated procedure by adding an excessive amount of uranium, causing the uranium-235 model exceeded critical mass, igniting a fission chain reaction, and ultimately receiving a neutron radiation dose far beyond lethal. Now that we've covered these basic principles, we're going to take you through the largest battle against nuclear radiation in human history, and from it, learn some methods for dealing with nuclear radiation that hopefully you will never have to use. According to the International Nuclear Event Scale, the criticality accident that happened to Hisashi Ouchi was classified as a level 4, and as for the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident, it was rated a level 7, only because the highest level is 7. On April the 26th, 1986 local time, at 1:23 a.m. firefighters, 28 people in all, arrived at the scene of the explosion and began fighting the fire. The radiation levels in some areas had already exceeded tens of thousands of Roentgens. To put that in perspective, an exposure of 10 Roentgens for 1 hour will significantly increase the risk of cancer. Receive a dose of 500 Roentgens within a few hours, and your chance of survival is 50-50. Above 800 Roentgens, survival is virtually impossible. With no protective measures, the firefighters disregarded their own personal safety to stop the fire from spreading. By 6:35 a.m., they had extinguished all the external fires. Of the 108 people who took part in fighting the fire, 28 would die from acute radiation poisoning. They were all airlifted to designated hospitals to be treated for acute radiation sickness. Their skin was cracking, their bodies covered in sores. Their daily bowel movements numbered as high as 20 to 30 times, accompanied by blood and mucus, just by turning their head. They would find a clump of hair left on the pillow. Within 3 months, 28 of them would die from acute radiation sickness, and it was their sacrifice that saved the adjacent reactor number 3. However, the crisis was far from over. At the bottom of the destroyed reactor, 1,200 tons of superheated magma was still burning at a temperature of over 3,000 degrees. Countless radioactive gases and particles were drifting with the wind. 15 hours after the explosion, the radiation levels in the city of Chernobyl had soared to 600,000 times the normal level. To get an accurate reading at the explosion site, the chief of the Soviet chemical troops, General Pikalov, took the lead himself. In the early hours of the next day, he personally drove a lead-shielded truck into the core contamination zone and measured the precise radiation levels, providing critical data for the subsequent rescue efforts. 34 hours after the explosion, over 1,000 large trucks arrived in Pripyat to begin the evacuation. The residents were notified that they could only bring identification documents and essential supplies. Children were allowed to bring 1 toy. 3.5 hours later, approximately 43,000 residents had been completely evacuated. A crucial detail to add here is that After the nuclear power plant exploded, a massive amount of radioactive iodine-131 was released into the environment. The thyroid gland absorbs this isotope, and prolonged exposure can lead to thyroid cancer. The risk is especially high for children. Taking iodine tablets immediately before or after exposure can effectively block the absorption of radioactive iodine, reducing the risk of cancer. Through the Quark AI health search, we can also get clear recommendations on when to take medication, its dosage and potential adverse reactions. If you have further questions, you can send your concerns to the health assistant with a single click to get more targeted and precise advice. However, the Soviet Union had already missed the optimal window for distributing the iodine tablets, and the coverage was incomplete. This caused the incidence of thyroid cancer among children in Ukraine and Belarus to skyrocket after the accident. Skyrocketing after the accident, serving as a harsh lesson for all nations in the years to come. At the same time, in order to seal the reactor which was exposed after the explosion, the Soviet Army resorted to a near-suicidal rescue mission. Soviet Air Force Major General Nikolai Antoshkin personally led the charge. Commanding a team of elite pilots, he flew over 3,000 sorties in total, dropping 5,000 tons of a mixture of dolomite, boron carbide, sand and lead powder into the reactor's open core. The dolomite was used to release carbon dioxide to lower the oxygen content near the reactor and slow the burning of the graphite. Boron, as an effective neutron absorber, could slow or even stop the nuclear fission chain reaction, and the lead would melt, helping to cool the core and block radiation. The radiation levels outside the nuclear power plant were consequently reduced to less than 1% of their initial levels. Some of the pilots, enduring lethal doses of radiation, flew as many as 33 missions in a single day. However, the nuclear fuel was still reacting. Even more troubling, the heat released by the nuclear reaction caused the reactor's temperature to rise continuously, creating a risk that the concrete slab beneath the reactor could melt through. Highly radioactive water leaked from the explosion had formed a massive pool beneath the concrete slab. Beneath the concrete slab, a massive pool had formed. Once the molten core burns through the floor, the two would meet instantly, triggering an unbelievably terrifying steam explosion. Everything within a 300-kilometer radius, every city would be wiped off the map. An incalculable amount of radioactive material would threaten the entirety of Europe. At that moment, the only solution was to enter a pool with off-the-charts radiation levels and install a temporary pipe to drain the radioactive boiling water. At the time, everyone considered it a suicide mission, but still 3 heroes stepped forward. For the sake of millions upon millions of innocent people, they unflinchingly marched to their deaths. They were the Chernobyl shift supervisor, Boris Baranov, senior engineer of the turbine room 2 control unit, Valery Bespalov, and the senior mechanical engineer of reactor number 2, Alexei Ananenko. Experts believed they would likely be killed by the radiation before they even reached the drainage valve. However, using a Geiger counter and their intimate knowledge of the power plant's layout, they not only bypassed the areas with the highest radiation levels, but also successfully completed the mission. Just as originally predicted, the cause, radioactive molten material did eventually burn through the floorboards. Fortunately, thanks to the efforts of these 3 heroes, the radioactive cooling water in the pool had long been drained. However, the Soviets at the time were still not at ease. What if the radioactive molten material continued to seep downwards? Below that lay a vast aquifer. Nearby was the Pripyat River, which flows into the Dnieper River and then the Black Sea. If the radioactive material seeped into the water supply, the drinking water and food safety of the entire Soviet Union, and even Eastern Europe, would face a devastating impact. And so a massive number of miners and subway construction workers were progressively summoned to Chernobyl. Their mission was to dig a tunnel leading to the area beneath the reactor in order to install a liquid nitrogen cooling system to cool the potential molten core. Inside the tunnel, oxygen was extremely scarce, and the temperature was as high as 50 degrees Celsius, The miners were unable to use their respiratory masks, so they all took them off and stripped off their shirts, digging day and night without interruption. No one knows exactly how much radiation they were exposed to. Thousands of miners rotated in 3-hour shifts around the clock. Finally, after 15 days, they had dug a tunnel 1.8 meters in diameter and 150 meters long. Many years later, when one of the miners was asked about this, he said, "Someone had to do it. If not us, then someone else. We did our duty. Should we have done it? It's too late to discuss that now. All I can say is I have no regrets at all." In the end, beneath the reactor, a concrete slab and the cooling system were installed to prevent the nuclear fuel from seeping downwards. The war in Chernobyl was finally entering its final stage. What had to be done now was to clean up the radioactive materials in the heavily contaminated zones around the nuclear power plant and to use radiation-proof materials to build a giant sarcophagus to completely seal off reactor number 4. To minimize the physical damage from radiation, the duration of work had to be traded for the number of workers, and so 100,000 soldiers and 400,000 civilians, including workers, engineers, nurses, doctors and scientists, rushed to Chernobyl from all over the Soviet Union. They were about to undertake the most tragic and also the final major campaign in Soviet history. The workers mobilized all sorts of heavy machinery around the nuclear power plant. 30 kilometers, the core contamination zone. Radioactive solid waste within the zone was buried in massive pits and covered with cement. Soldiers used helicopters to airdrop huge quantities of a liquid solidifier. This mixture caused the radioactive dust to solidify into a crust on the ground, which was then cleaned up house by civil defense units. Additionally, before the next year's flood season arrived, the Ministry of Water Resources successfully constructed over 130 dams to protect all the rivers within a 1,500 square kilometer area, preventing radioactive dust from being washed by the rain into the Pripyat River and threatening the Dnieper River basin downstream. Scientists also risked their lives, drilling into the reactor from the outside to monitor it, to ensure there was no longer any possibility of another explosion. However, the construction of the sarcophagus faced a massive obstacle because the sarcophagus had to be built directly around the reactor. But fragments of graphite from the 3rd floor, scattered during the explosion, now covered the reactor's roof and the surrounding area. These graphite fragments were all extremely radioactive. No one had ever worked in an area with such high levels of radiation. At first, the Soviets used robots for remote cleanup, but in the areas with the most intense radiation, the robots broke down. With no other choice, they had to send in Soviet soldiers. September 17, 1986, General Tarakanov is giving a pre-mission briefing. The exact words are lost to history. We can only piece together what was said from various documentaries and records. "Comrades, the Commissioner and I were already on the roof 2 days ago. One thing is certain, there is nothing to fear up there. As you all know, our people have suffered enough from this disaster. Now it's up to us soldiers to finish the job. Remember all your protective protocols," and then shoveled the waste material down as fast as possible. The alarm sounds. A team of 8 soldiers, along with an officer, would rush onto the roof to clear the radioactive rubble at top speed, sweeping it off the side. Each soldier could only be on the roof for 2 to 3 minutes at a time. When the radiation was too high, they could only stay for 45 seconds. As soon as one group finished, the next would quickly take their place. Every soldier was equipped with a radiation dosimeter. As soon as it reached the warning level, they would be immediately removed from the radiation zone. But some soldiers, when they worked deliberately, left their dosimeters behind, because they knew that if they left, inexperienced new recruits would have to be sent up to replace them. A total of 3,828 people took part in this operation, fighting atomic particles with shovels. After several months, the cleanup was finally complete. 3 Soviet soldiers raised the red flag of victory at the highest point of the nuclear power plant, just as they had years before when they conquered Berlin, raising the red flag over the Reichstag building. In November, after an immense human effort, the sarcophagus was built, and finally completed over reactor number 4. Seen from a distance, the entire sarcophagus looked like a colossal tomb, forged from steel and concrete. It is undeniable that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster was inextricably linked to the reactor's design flaws. Human operational error was also a direct trigger, and the cover-ups by the bureaucracy only added to the number of innocent victims. But none of this had anything to do with the heroes of the disaster relief effort. In this battle against nuclear radiation, a total of 600,000 Soviet citizens were awarded the Chernobyl Accident Liquidators Medal. We pay our highest respects to them here. Because the number of radiation dosimeters was severely limited, 10% of them exceeded the radiation limit of 25 Roentgens. 1998. The Roentgen, a unit of radiation exposure, was gradually phased out, and the heroes, the nation they once protected, had become history. The year is 2025. A drone carrying high-explosive bombs attacks Chernobyl, specifically the new metal sarcophagus over reactor number 4. In an instant, flames shot into the sky. Ukraine accuses Russia of a deliberate attack. Russia retorts, claiming Ukraine staged the whole thing. As for who the real culprit is, we have no way of knowing. But this nuclear power plant, the one that 600,000 Soviets sacrificed themselves to protect in order to save their entire nation, and even all of humankind, has now been reduced to nothing more than a bargaining chip in war. And the descendants of these very heroes might now be on the same land their fathers once united to save, sparing no cost, drawing swords against each other in a fight to the death. Let's hope that peace can be restored to the world soon. And let's also hope that the efforts of those heroes, who saved humanity from the suffering of nuclear radiation, were not all in vain. All right, that's all for this episode. If you found this interesting or helpful in any way, consider following us. That way you can learn even more about medicine.